It's not water there, but that's okay with you. I need the, I have that. Let's do this. Well, let me just start and then we'll sort of play this by ear. We have a PowerPoint, and Mary has been my IT person here, so thank you, Mary, for providing the IT. Thank you, guys.
Don't clap yet.
wait till we see how it goes.
You gotta wait.
And I do appreciate being here. I think it's an honor to be speaking in front of your group, and thank you for Carl Jackson and Gregory Carswell for inviting me. I was reading the Wall Street Journal this morning, and I saw sort of an interesting little piece. It was actually about Vladimir Putin, but I think it sort of applies to how the left and the right, or the up and the down, view each other. It's a story about two Russian peasant farmers. These two farmers each had just one cow that was skin and bones. Suddenly, one of the cows began to rapidly gain weight, allowing its owner to prosper because he has more and more milk to sell. Seeing that the other farmer is increasingly miserable, a fairy comes to him and offers to fulfill one wish. The farmer replies, "Kill my neighbor's cow." And I think that sort of talks about the envy of politics today. So anyway, that's my little story out of the Wall Street Journal. We're going to try our first IT here. We have a website for Belle Isle established last year, and on it is about a 4-minute video. I'd like to play it if we can. And, okay? Okay, I don't know if you'll hear was not or not. We will just pass on it.
We heard it earlier.
Everyone knows about promises. How far the standard of living has fallen for residents since the city's beginning.
Don't you have to turn off your
Turn off the other
slideshow?
one first. Okay.
I think you have to turn off your slideshow first.
I'm not a techie. Okay, we'll try it again here. Everyone knows about the promises of Detroit and how far the standard of living has fallen for residents since the city. Well, we're not getting much. Recently, there have been a number of stories about the city's recovery. So people are fighting back and making progress. Hey, well, we'll just go to the well, the next, yeah, that didn't work, so we're just going to go to we're still going to
Okay, so you pull
and we can try it later. No, we weren't getting up here.
Don't forget there's dessert up there.
Please, with that, take this one over. Technical. Okay, all right. We will get going here. All right, well, yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's an honor. Back in 1932, let me do a sound check first before you go. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, good. Back in 1932, Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, in 1932, wrote, "It is one of the happy incidents of the federal system that a single courageous state may, if its citizens choose, serve as a laboratory. and tried novel social and economic experiments without risk to the rest of the country. Well, novel experiments, a really big change, only happen when there is a big need. Well, Detroit is that big need. Here's some facts about Detroit. Population in Detroit in 1950 was about 2 million people. Today it is less than 700,000. During that time, Detroit has turned from being the richest city in the country on a per capita basis to being the poorest. Only 1 in 4 people in Detroit is employed. And the population loss has caused a downward spiral, which leads to difficulty in providing police and other city services because of the low population density. I don't want to get too late with numbers, but Detroit has about 5,000 people per square mile. Chicago has about 12,000. Manhattan has about 28,000. So Detroit, by shrinking, it's a big city with few people, it's tougher to deliver services. Now, Governor Snyder said that what Detroit needs is growth, and I agree with him. By the way, I'm a Detroiter. Go ahead.
You want me to
Yeah, I'm going to put. Okay, good.
What we're going to do is go to the next page, this one,
Yeah.
go back.
Okay.
Forward is down.
Forward is down, back is a minute. I'm a Detroiter. I was born on Pinehurst, if you know Detroit, between Outer Grand and 7 Mile. I went to McDowell Elementary School. Played in Palmer Park. So I know Detroit. Detroit needs a game changer. It needs a big one. Well, we have a game changer in Belle Isle, which is our opportunity to own a Hong Kong or a Singapore. How many here know a P.J. O'Rourke? Okay, all right, good. P.J. O'Rourke has written about 12 books. He's a libertarian leaning author and humorist, political humorist. He lived in Hong Kong for a while. He's very familiar with Hong Kong. When he heard about the Belle Isle idea, he came to Detroit. I toured the city with him, and he subsequently wrote an article which was in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year. I know the likelihood is low, but it basically says, "Welcome to New Detroit, Hong Kong." The article received a lot of attention, and he basically outlined the Belle Isle idea here, and thinks highly of it. In fact, he's coming back into town in about 2 weeks, and he and I are going to meet and do some strategy on it. Okay, I want to press the right button here. And why did I write the book? As I mentioned, Detroit needs a game changer. And as I will go through in my talk here, I'll explain why it will help Detroit. But in addition to Detroit, the entire nation, if this were allowed to happen, the entire nation would be looking at what we're doing, this experiment, as Judge Brandeis mentioned. In fact, the entire world would be looking at it, of how a freedom-based community with a value-based limited government could make for a thriving city. The book, I'll show it, I'll hold it up here. Yeah, I think I only brought one. I think we're going to wrap it off, aren't we?
Yeah.
The plan, okay. Here's the book, the front cover and the back cover has got a street scene. I know it's a little dark and you're probably tough to see. But the book is political fiction. And I won't call it a book either, it's a novella. It's too short for a book. It's only 158 pages. But it's a vision set in the future, 29 years. Investors buy the island from the city of Detroit now for $1 billion. Billion with a B, 9 zeros. Belle Isle is a 982-acre island set in the middle of the Detroit River. These investors hire a world-class planner. His name in the book is Darren Fraser. Darren, by the way, is based on a real person whose name I want to share with you. Well, Darren designs a walking community served by a monorail. There are no cars in Belle Isle except for service vehicles during the middle of the night, such as bringing food in or taking trash out. And these service vehicles will be electric and quiet, and so as not to disturb people. The monorail would run around the island and would also cross the river to a transportation center on the right side of the river. There would be a mega parking deck, and there'd be shuttles to the airport and downtown and so forth. People could park their cars there. If they want to drive up north, they'd take the monorail to the transportation center and then head up from there. The main road on Belle Isle, in the book, is a racetrack, motor racing track designed for Formula One racing. The reason that I did this, well, one is I'm a race fan, but apart from that, the fact is that Formula One racing would bring or attract foreign journalists to the area to see what Belle Isle is all about. And while they're here, they would see what Detroit is all about, and coming back would create a lot of international interest in the area. The other roads in Belle Isle are more narrow, just wide enough for service and emergency vehicles. The reason that I went with a monorail scheme as opposed to cars is to achieve population density. When one eliminates a lot of the parking, or all the parking on the island, you're able to actually put more people on there, which is important because for financial viability, I'm a developer, we need to have as many people as we can in order to pay for the infrastructure and the purchase of the island. We can hold about 20,000 households, or about 50,000 people, which make Belle Isle about the size of Battle Creek population-wise. There'll be homes and condominiums, apartments, offices, hotels, restaurants, retail, schools, sports center, places of worship, performing arts and theater, a hospital, farmers market, beautiful parks. The historic jewels of Belle Isle, such as, for those of you familiar with it, like the casino, the aquarium, the horse stables, Detroit Boat Club, can get restored. Right now, it's vacant since 1996. That would be restored. We're going to get into the form of government, but we also need to make sure that this community has culture. The people are going to be attracted to a free society, of course, but it is an island, and it is a long ways away from perhaps where they are starting out. They're not going to stay there forever if we don't have the culture. And it's going to be a cold climate, so we have to have good things to do both in the winter and the summer. Belle Isle would be a happening place. Of course, we already have the hydroplane races. We have the air races, with the Red Bull air races. We have running races, like the Free Press Marathon runs on Belle Isle right now. We implement things like a Big Chill hockey game, which sells out at the big house every year, an outdoor hockey game. Ice festival, but my sort of wacky favorite, I don't know how I dreamed this up, is to have a sled dog marathon every winter. So you start the race at 9 at night, you run right through the night, 9 in the morning, whoever sled dog goes the farthest wins. And of course, the restaurants and bars will be open all night, everybody have I think that's a great time. So nobody be bored on Belle Isle, we make sure of that. But of course, the real difference in Belle Isle would be the government. Now, in the book, Belle Isle, we applied for Commonwealth status with the United States with a large degree of autonomy. Now, we modeled after two existing Commonwealths. One is the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands in the Pacific Ocean. The other is the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Both of those two jurisdictions enjoy a very large group of autonomous princes. They don't pay any federal taxes in both Puerto Rico and the Northern Marianas. Now, there will be free access to and from Belle Isle for both the Belle Islanders and the Detroiters or anybody else who wants to come on. I want to make very clear it would not be a gated community. Many Detroiters would work on Belle Isle, and many residents of Belle Isle would work in Detroit, but rather than drive onto Belle Isle, they'd take the monorail. What is Belle Isle about? Let's talk about the economics first. Belle Isle would attract investment, attract firms that want to operate in the approximate economic epicenter of the world's largest economy. You probably heard that we're regarded as a flyover state, Midwest, the flyover region. Well, we should be the fly from state, or the fly from city, or the If you're going to go to Los Angeles, you can get to Los Angeles more quickly from here than you can from New York. If you want to go to New York more quickly than you can from Los Angeles. There's no reason that we can't establish ourselves, being in the center of this big economy, to be very attractive to business. There'd be a high general GDP, gross domestic product. I and other people who are sort of familiar with it think it'd be about 3 times the normal for the U.S. And we would create manufacturing on the other side of the river, just on a spillover effect. I'll get into a little bit more of that later. Because in Belle Isle, we have really no land to speak of, or plants, things like that. Now, I'm going to talk about taxes in a bit here, but taxes have to really follow spending. So let's start with spending. On Belle Isle, we would have, we would spend less than 10% of the gross domestic product. As compared to in the U.S. right now, the average, including the state, local, and federal taxes, amounts to about 42% of gross domestic product. Now, we could achieve that 10% if we rely upon people to rely upon themselves. Now, for those who can't take care of themselves, and in society, there's always somebody that needs some help, and not due to not wanting to be the way they are, but through physical or mental disabilities. We would have to have a charitable safety net. And I think this is one of the key parts of having a society, is to emphasize having charity. Charity, we have a lot of charities, of course, right now, but they've largely been replaced by government. Government's crowded out charity. Well, in Belle Isle, we would have a strong charitable support system. I'll get into more of the details a little bit later. Okay, let's see.
There you go.
There you go. Okay. Now, taxation is extremely important. Two principles of taxation on Belle Isle. One would be never tax what you want to encourage, and the other is taxation should be transparent. You should always know how much you're paying. So, in the area of encouragement, there'd be no taxes on labor income because we want to encourage people to work. There would be no taxes on investment income because we want people that have money to invest their money. And of course, there'd be no taxes on death because death itself is enough of a negative, I think. You know, don't need to go beyond that.
Get that right.
That's right. That's a big enough penalty. So. We would be receiving one service from the United States government, and that would be defense. Belle Isle would not have its own army. And right now, defense costs about $2,000 per person per year. That's the military budget. Military budget's around $650 billion. So we'd say to the U.S. government, okay, we're just going to write you a check for $2,000 for everybody that lives in the island. Not going to ask any questions about stupid wars or whatever. Just going to write the check. Be done with it. So how do we raise taxes? Well, there'd be two taxes. One would be a consumption tax of about 10%, like sales tax. And it could be a tad less, but you limit it to 10. That would raise about 1/3 of the revenue required to run the island. The other 2/3 would need to be raised, or would be raised by a real estate tax. But a little bit different angle on the real estate tax than what you're used to, and how the rest of the country really runs. The normal taxation system in most of the United States is based upon taxing the value and the accrued value of the property. Belle Isle would be different. We would only tax the raw land value. Well, why is that? Well, the reason being is if we tax the improvements that the owner makes, that's something that's discouraging the owner from making those improvements to the same degree. And that would violate the principle of not taxing that which you want to encourage. Also, government is what provides the raw land value by having clean streets, safe streets, good public infrastructure and so forth. So the value created in a society by government is only the raw land value, not what's on it. If anybody would have an interest in the improvements, it might be your insurance company, but you pay the premiums. So. Now, we, of course, probably don't even need to say this, we have a constitutionally mandated balanced budget. I mean, it's silly, absolutely silly to spend more than you can have, and you're just putting the debt on the future generations, which is my mind is immoral. Okay, let's see. There we go. I won't spend too much time on this, but the form of government, or the way the nuts and bolts of it, has really been borrowed from a model on Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein is a very small country in the Alps, near Switzerland. It's only about 25,000 people. It's actually a constitutional monarchy. And their king, or monarch, a fellow by the name Hans Adam II, has written a great book, which I've used and pulled his ideas out to model Belle Isle as far as its judicial system, legislative and president and so forth. Many of the ideas are brought, as I mentioned, from Liechtenstein, and you see that on the bottom point there are appointed judges, and people ask me, well, why do you propose appointed judges rather than elected judges? Isn't that undemocratic? Well, when you look through history in other countries, elected judges tend to be redistributionists over time. It's just the way it works. So appointed judges who don't have to give away things to get reelected tend not to do that. So we appoint the judges.
Those be limited term judges,
Sorry?
judges appointed for life or limited term?
They'd be appointed for a term, but a fairly long term, and then reappointed. So yeah, I don't want to get in a great amount of detail, but actually in the book I outlined a productivity system where judges are rated on how quickly they actually get cases processed. And if they don't process or don't work hard enough, like all the rest of us, and they don't process their cases in a timely manner, then they actually are not going to get reappointed. So. The core principles: limited, transparent public service, exceptional planning and architecture. I'm confident that if Belle Isle were to go forward, we would have the best buildings and architecture in the world. And you say, well, why is that? Well, I would answer because we can afford it, because we're a highly productive society. We have a high degree of personal freedom. We would rely upon ourselves, and we have a very strong charitable system to support those who are less fortunate. The social safety net in this country, which consumes so much of our current budget, has become abused in many cases. And Belle Isle would be replaced by a competitive organized system of charitable support. Without getting in great detail, it would work, but where the government would actually have a small group that would analyze a fairly small number of charities, and based on audited financial statements and audited mission performance, would produce a rating, much like Moody's or Standard & Poor's with the businesses. Then we would take 1% of our GDP, 1% of the 10, and contribute that to charities, with the citizens voting online as to which charities they want to support. So rather than having the government decide who gets supported, the citizens would. I don't know if any of you have a company 401k where you can go online and you can adjust your asset allocation and this stock or that stock, but the system will work very similarly. So if you want to support the Humane Society, fine. You so vote on your online. Or if you want to support cancer, fine. But the citizens will decide. Okay, so now we have the best tax system on the planet. We have constitutionally mandated balanced budgets. We have the best government insured, and we would have a very aggressive anti-corruption group on the island too. We all know that if things happen in government, special interests take over. People get campaign contributions, and they do things they really shouldn't do. Well, we would have a different system. First of all, we wouldn't be spending so much money to make it so important, but also we would have some very strict controls on what the people in government could or couldn't do. Now, Singapore has such a group. That's why Singapore has really grown, is they have a strong anti-corruption group. Now, as far as the citizenry, to pay for the purchase of the island and to pay for the public structure, the monorail, sewer, water, paving, so forth, we're going to have to charge a citizen fee. Numbers seem to indicate about $300,000. I know it sounds like a lot of money, but I've done the math, and savings in taxation could support a loan almost equal to that, much like a house mortgage. You know how we qualify for house mortgage when they have income ratios and all that. Well, the money you'd be saving and paying taxes could pay a loan back for the citizen fee. Now, we also have an exception. Perhaps 20% of the citizens could come in for a reduced fee or no fee. So we could have some starving artists, musicians, and some of the skilled construction trades that we need. It's no different than having colleges offering academic scholarships. Belle Isle would attract people from all over the world. I would expect half of them would come from other countries. Why would they do that? Well, France has a 75% income tax rate, so well, we have the best French restaurants in the world, by the way, I'm sure. Sweden has a 57% tax rate, down from 84% only a couple of years ago, by the way. Chinese absolutely want to get out of that country. And they fear the nationalization, they want better education for the kids. We have a lot of people in China coming. Russia, the ruble is in free fall, so it's 30% of its value. And you know what's happening there with the sanctions. So entrepreneurs from all over the globe would come, and they bring their money with them. Well, how much would they bring? Well, I don't know exactly, but I'm confident that we would have the highest household net worth in the world here. By the way, as an aside, anybody know which zip code in the United States has the highest household net worth? Anybody happen to know where that is?
DC.
Right here in Oakland County.
DC.
Okay, I got Bloomfield Hills, DC,
Beverly Hills.
Potomac, Maryland. Potomac, Maryland, 13,000 households, average net worth of 2.0 million. It is a suburb of Washington,
DC. Yeah.
Anybody see a problem with it? Well, would Belle Isle truly be Detroit's game changer? I've described Belle Isle to you, but what effect would it have on Detroit? Well, I contend that the capital sitting on Belle Isle will have a substantial spillover effect on Detroit. Belle Islanders are going to spend all their income in Detroit, going to the restaurants, the sporting events, theater, and so forth and so on. But in addition, many of these folks have a business. They have a manufacturing plant or whatever. They can't build it on Belle Isle. There's no land. So they have to build it somewhere else. Well, entrepreneurs are control freaks usually, and they're going to build it very close to where they live so they can watch the shop. And that would be right across the river in Detroit. Detroit has a lot going for it. It has a lot of vacant and inexpensive land. And Detroit, across the river, has potential for being a world-class logistics center. If we were simply to displace the runway at Coleman A. Young Airport, runway right now is 5,100 feet. displace it to the west a few hundred feet and lengthen it to 11,000, we could start flying 747 freighters out of there going nonstop to Asia. Detroit, that area of Detroit has a great potential for being a logistics center. It has rail, expressways for the truck, has a ship that could have a shipping port, and as I mentioned, it could have a great logistics or freight airport. So the folks who are investing their money from all over the world or bring their money to the area, they have a spot to put it. Now once all that activity starts to happen, the Jefferson corridor would develop a lot of retail, more than it has right now. It has a nice historic district, Indian Village. There'll be a lot of new mid-rise residential, new office, new homes and parks. Detroit has, southeastern Michigan has the largest concentration of engineers and skilled tradespeople in the country, right here. We have some great trade and technical schools in the area. And we can train people to have the skills to enter the manufacturing. And Michigan is now a right to work. So you don't have to, if you're a business owner, you don't have to worry about the union running your company. And as I mentioned before, we have very inexpensive land. You buy land in Detroit for 10 cents a square foot. Hong Kong costs about $1,400 a square foot. So if this were to happen in Belle Isle and across the river, what would it mean for Detroit? Well, this area across the river, I call it Jefferson. It's only 2 miles to the east of downtown. You know, we all know downtown's coming back. This would provide a second anchor to the east of the downtown area. And in between would quickly fill in. Thousands and thousands of new jobs would be created, and Detroit would become a comeback city. Now, here's what Detroit needs for its comeback. It needs blight removal, needs responsive government, needs massive capital infusion. Enormous economic growth, education, and training. Of course, that would bring dignity and jobs. Detroit just is coming out of bankruptcy right now, as you all know. And so what it means is Detroit has a balanced balance sheet with no debt. It used to have that back a few decades ago and got into trouble. The changes that remain in bankruptcy are not going to ensure the city comes back. In the past, Detroit's been a failed city with a big operating deficit. It's now a failed city with a balanced budget, or balanced balance sheet, actually. So we need to do something more than just what we have been doing. Freedom is the key to innovation, productivity, for self-reliance, discipline, hard work. That's what makes society function well. I would say to people outside the area, where would you put your business? I would say we have a great sales pitch. If you come and live in Belle Isle and have your business in Detroit. Reinvent Detroit, give Detroiters a shot at the American dream. Detroit would benefit from the money, billion dollars. They could use that to move the blight and educate the residents. We'd be spending about $4 billion on the public infrastructure, monorail, sewer water paving, and utility plants and so forth. That'd be the public side. The private investment would be about 20 to 25 billion. That'd be for the retail, homes, condos, and so forth, so on. Hospital. A tremendous amount of investment in the area to provide a lot of jobs. Almost under trust you, quite right. I have the same problem at remote at home. Say what?
Look, there it is.
There we go.
It's just a little slow because you're farther away.
Okay. All right. Well, the question I get asked all the time is, Okay, is this going to happen? It's going to happen. Well, the answers are, would Detroit go for it? Would Michigan go for it? And would Washington go for it? All three would have to be on board. And it's not going to be an easy sell. But I would say to those who are questioning it, what about the 700,000 people? If you look at the ledger, who would it harm and who would it help? It harmed virtually nobody, or very few, who would help. 700,000 people plus even out here in the suburbs would have that effect. Oops. The millions in this area will depend upon our leadership. I mean everybody here. Our willingness to step up, talk about the idea, promote the idea, and say this is something we want to do. Easy to say no. It takes courage to say yes. Just to wrap up now, as I mentioned, Detroit is emergence from bankruptcy. They once again start with a clean balance sheet. But what will the future bring? I guarantee you, if we had our own Singapore or Hong Kong in our backyard, Detroit would once again become the beacon of light for Michigan, for the U.S., for the world. Thank you for attending today, and I'll take any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Are you anticipating families also being residents? And what kind of education are you giving children?
Okay, the question is, do I anticipate families?
Yeah, younger families raising children, and what would be the educational provisions?
Okay, good question. Families, absolutely. The composition of households at Belle Isle would be same as anywhere, any other community. Education would be private. There'd be no public education. Does that answer your question? Okay. Try to do it in the order I'm seeing the hands.
That you were thinking about Belle Isle having its own currency. My question is, who would issue that? What would it be backed by? And don't you think that would cause more problems for getting this accepted at the federal level?
Well, in the book, Belle Isle starts out using the U.S. dollar.
Okay.
About 10 years after the start of this 29-year period, the U.S. dollar loses its world reserve currency status. It's fictional, right? It's prediction. I'm trying to make a point here, though. And we have some serious inflation and instability in the U.S. dollar value. At that point, Belle Isle decides to issue its own currency. Now, the currency, I named it the Rand after Ayn Rand. Could be named anything. But it would be issued by the Belle Isle Treasury. There would be no central bank. And it would be backed by a basket of commodities. Now, when I was writing the Treasury section, and there are a number of chapters in the book, there are 32 chapters, they're all short. The book's pretty thin. I got to the Treasury section, I thought I did some research, and on Switzerland, because the Swiss franc historically has been one of the safest, strongest currencies in the world. And back in the turn of the 20th century, the Swiss franc was backed by about 40% gold. It's now about 25%. So the question in my mind was, well, if we're going to back the Rand with gold, what's the proper percentage? So I called my friend David Lippman, and had breakfast with David. So here's what I'm doing. And by the way, he's been a very big supporter of the Belle Isle idea. He's spoken on its behalf. He said, Rod, what I would do is back it by 100% by a basket of commodities such as gold, silver, oil contracts, cattle futures, you pick it. I mean, you could have a basket of pork belly futures. You could have a basket of commodities, 100% bags, which would then take out the risk of price fluctuations of whatever commodity, like gold right now, I mean, it's fluctuating quite a bit. So that's the way it's done here. So part of the, we take about $1 billion to do that, by the way. When you take the currency, the one needs to have outstanding per capita, and the backing, and the flow ratios and all that, you need about $1 billion to do that. So it's not insurmountable in the context of $25 million budget. Yes.
It's going to have its own constitution. Is that going to be based on the U.S. Constitution, the Liechtenstein, or a combination?
Combination. There would be certainly heavily the favorable Bill of Rights that we have in this country would be there. The organization of the legislative and the judicial and executive branch would be based on Liechtenstein more than here. When you have a city-state of 50,000 people, you got to keep the overhead down. You know,
Right.
So we can't have a huge.
Speaking of overhead, if I can follow up on that, as far as the privatization of government services, is this going to be based on a system similar to what they're using in Sandy Springs, Georgia, where the whole city is pretty much created in 1 year on that type of?
It's a great question. How many here are familiar with Sandy Springs, Georgia? Okay, 2. All right. Sandy Springs is a community just north of Atlanta. It's an Atlanta suburb, and it's in Fulton County, Georgia. It's sort of getting short shrift here over a long period of time. The county services were poor, the taxes were high, and so forth and so on. So a fellow by the name of Oliver Porter led an effort to become its own city, and to do it on a new model of having called privatization on steroids. So the city's 100,000 people, and they got started with 2 employees for 100,000. The city's 100,000 people. They privatized everything. Now they said do not privatize police and fire. But but all the other city services are totally privatized. Now their employment has grown drastically. Now it's 3, but it's still pretty good. Yes.
Yeah, I heard the name of the country Singapore invoked a couple times. I think, were you at John Stossel a while back?
Yeah.
I believe you may have mentioned them then as well, perhaps during that interview.
Yeah.
My knowledge of Singapore prior to hearing this is that, one, it is a country where there's a death penalty for even like a single dose of an illegal drug, and where there's severe censorship of certain music, such as certain rock and roll songs are banned and so forth. How is that an example of free enterprise?
Well, you mentioned 2 aspects of Singapore. By the way, Singapore has a sort of called Disney World with a death penalty. But from an economic standpoint, it works big time. The growth, it has gone from during the same period of time, Detroit went from 2 million down to less than 700. Singapore went from 1 million to 4 million people. Belle Isle would avoid doing the things you just mentioned. Okay. And, the 2 are not tied together. Of course, you have to have police, you have to have a legal system. You can't have bad people running around creating chaos. But you don't need to go over the top like Singapore has.
A question here.
Yeah.
Just do you anticipate any connection or commerce more on the other side of the river with Canada? There's a community over there too, or a few.
Yeah, the question is, would Canada benefit also? I would say the whole area would benefit. Canada less so because there's no direct bridge between Belle Isle and Canada. But I think there would be some benefit to Canada too. I'm not that worried about Canada. Yes, sir.
Another question. Oh, so point of view?
Yes, I am.
Okay, yeah. My other question was, you were at the beginning. You said, okay, we're not going to tax anything we want to encourage.
Right.
Does that mean you want to discourage consumption?
Well, we're not. We do want to discourage consumption if we're going to weight it against production. People will produce things. They aren't going to produce anything that doesn't get consumed at the end of the day. So having a modest, and 10% is still in the modest category, consumption tax will not keep the economy from flowing. So will naturally balance out. I hope I answered your question. I'm not worried about the 10% consumption tax, but I absolutely don't want to encourage people from working and as hard as being as productive as they can, both through investing capital and their wages. Okay, you'll be after our new question here. Yes, sir.
You said an airport. I'm not from Detroit. I live around here in Ann Arbor. Is it, you talking about Detroit City Airport?
Yes.
Where is that with respect?
East side.
It would be, you mean, respecting the picture?
Yeah.
It would be to the left and up. So the flight path for runway 33 at Detroit City would be right over about here, and then it's about 3 miles up.
About 20 minutes
Pretty close.
drive from Belle Isle.
You can parachute out and land there.
Field is on freeway. 75 north, there's 94 east.
What about zoning? Do you have zoning ordinances, land use, land regulation, zoning board of appeals, local citizens controlling the use of their neighbor's property for aesthetic purposes?
That's a great question. The question is there a typical U.S. zoning board of appeals, zoning matters, and so forth and so on. Let me just start off by saying I'm a developer. Okay, I started my dad's company when he was building single-family home subdivisions, and so he buy a tract of land, put the sewer, water, and paving in, and start selling the lots. Sometimes he would build the lots, sometimes not. But there was he had something called an architectural control committee. And so I'm just out of college looking at this. What's that all about? He said, well, we can't have people building things on their lot that is going to reduce the value of the other lots, okay? Because we're in the process of selling them. Okay, well, who's on their architectural control committee? I am. Okay, all right. Well, what if people submit a plan that the architectural control committee doesn't like? Well, they don't have to buy the lot. They can go somewhere else. Well, the same principles would apply here. This may not seem very libertarian, but when you have a very close to that high density, 30,000 people per square mile, you have to have control of what goes on. You have things like view restriction. You build a building here and restricts the view over here and creates a mess. So this would be very tightly controlled. In the book, Darren Fraser, the master planner, the world-class planner, he makes all the decisions. He consults with other planners around the world. So he's wired in with connectivity with some of the best planners and architects in the world. And it wouldn't be the normal planning commission people you find, frankly, in the local cities who aren't qualified. These people would be very qualified. So, but we're very controlled. But so if you're interested in living in Belle Isle, you say, well, I'm thinking about this lot over here, and Darren would say, okay, well, submit just a preliminary drawing, a sketch, what you have in mind. And this looks like it's a go, that's fine, the transaction happens, if not, you don't buy it, or else you modify your plan. So, it's still a free world. Yes, sir.
Would, in a sense, then, what you're proposing is more like it's like a proprietary community, isn't it?
Yes.
Like a PUD?
Yeah, it'd be like a PUD in a way, yeah. planning unit development, for those of you not in Oak City.
Yes.
Getting back to the government structure, you say it's gonna have a president, but that would mainly be because it's a Commonwealth. You'd really be more like a mayor, because it's a small community. And they'd have, would you be considering ranked choice voting as opposed to the first past the post that we have, or have you gone that far?
Ranked choice voting meaning having a runoff?
No, that's multiple choice. You choose 1, 2, and 3. Number 1 option, number 2.
Oh, 4 offices?
For any office, yeah.
Basically, the general system for positions would be to straight vote and then a runoff between the top 2. Right after. But that's up for discussion. If they want to, yes.
You mentioned the Northern Mariana Islands as somewhat of a model also. The Northern Mariana Islands and the United States entered into a compact of free association, which defined the relationships between the entities. And basically what they did is they went through the United States Code and they said, this section of the United States Code applies, this section doesn't, this section applies, that section doesn't, the tax sections don't apply in wholesale. They kind of went through and picked and choose what they wanted. Is that sort of what you're contemplating here, following that sort of model?
Are you talking about for the Constitution or for the laws?
For the actual laws that govern the
relationship with the U.S.
Well, the relationship with the U.S., well, those are two different questions.
Well, is it like a treaty? This is more like a compact between potential or theoretical sovereigns but because they are a territorial dominion of the United States, they're not a free and independent sovereign country.
Right.
So there's certain laws that apply. We have something like that on our tribal. Not all the Bill of Rights apply on all of tribal land. They're domestic, dependent nations. They're depending on the relationship. They used to communicate by treaties. Now it's by statute controls. So I'm just wondering exactly would it be a compact like the Northern Mariana Islands between Belle Isle and the United States, or would it be a treaty? Like sovereigns, equal sovereigns communicating with each other?
Well, this would be the first time in U.S. history something like this happened, because in the U.S. Constitution there are provisions for adding new states and for division of states. There is no provision for a retrogression like this. So I'm going to sort of say, to answer the question, I don't know, that it could end up being, probably be like legislation had to be passed in D.C. and in Michigan, and then actually probably doesn't have to be signed by the president. The state that's added to the union, the president doesn't have to approve it, it's Congress. That might apply here on a movement in the other direction. I don't know the answer to that question. It would be some form of action taken in Washington and in Michigan.
Because it's a form of almost secession in some ways.
I hate to use that word, but it is.
Yeah.
A form of this.
How about the precedent is, I don't know if it's a good precedent, but the precedent is a territorial governance.
Yeah, it's really not succession, because succession would imply total divorce, where Belle Isle would have to have its own army, its own everything.
But you see that you have the Virgin Islands, you got Guam, you got the Northern Mariana Islands, you got Puerto Rico, and they're all, some are administered and controlled by the Department of Interior, some are administered directly out of the White House in terms of who has oversight. So,
but we would push for as much autonomy as we could, and the two basic tenets would be free access, and the U.S. would defend us, and we pay for it. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So where does it stand right now? Because it's right now it's a state park, right?
Right. Yeah, it became a state park about a year ago, or earlier this year, I think. Yeah. And it's people ask me, well, now it's a state park, it's a 10-year lease, so I think a 10-year option doesn't that remove it from the game, potential game or not? And I really don't think it does. Because what effectively, any two parties to any agreement can modify their agreement. Right now we have a lease between the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. If this were to take place, both of those entities would have to be in agreement. So that state park lease would be modified. From a practical, political standpoint, the fact that it is now under state control rather than city control sort of has removed, the picketers and the sign carriers from being so involved. The control has already moved away from the city. So the next step would be a little bit easier. From a political standpoint.
So you say that's the next step, is getting the state approval. What do we do to help you out on this? How do we get involved?
Well, I have some plans and things underway I'm not free to share with you. I can share with you the vision for what the final product would likely be or something like that. As far as what you can do to help is talk to your neighbors and friends and say, this is an exciting idea, it would be good for the area, it would be good for Detroit, and if executed in the way that I would want it to be executed, if I'm in control of the process, the whole world will look at it as an experiment in good governance.
This $1 billion that we just come up with this cash already is, so this is something they'd be looking at right now as far as the city before it goes.
Well, it would be a cash purchase. So at closing of the transaction, when the title of the property goes to the Belle Isle Investment Corporation, or the city would receive money. Right. It would be cash for money transaction. By the way, if one were to get an appraisal on Belle Isle right now, what is Belle Isle worth the way it is at the moment? If it were deregulated the park and put it for sale, it would probably bring between 25 to 50 million, based upon other land prices and where it is, how far from downtown and so forth. So paying $1 billion for it is far, far more than Detroit ever realized by just not for sale. Yes, sir.
What kind of reactions have you got from inside the city of Detroit, from the government, from the?
Well, I'm not free to share all the reactions, but I've met with the lieutenant governor on the side there. He did say two things I thought were rather interesting in the time I met with him. One, it's the biggest idea he's ever heard about. And two, the second thing he said, it will never happen as long as President Obama is president.
Have you asked for any help from any groups or a person to get this going?
To what now?
Have you asked any groups or a group or a person to help get this going?
To help with the idea? There are, I don't think it's any secret that former President Chrysler is a big factor.
Okay.
And we've had a meeting with Penske people on this. Met with the Lieutenant Governor on it. PJ O'Rourke, big backer. As I mentioned, he's coming in town the week on Wednesday. The Automation Alley people made a presentation to them a few months ago, and they are backing that. They have a Automation Alley, whatever that. Those of you who are not from this area probably wouldn't be, but Oakland County, a few decades ago, in light of its heavy robotics industry in Oakland County, labeled itself Automation Alley, and now Wayne County and Johnson County picked up, and now these counties we're Automation Alley, okay? So, and they have a trade group which has an international division to it. I made a presentation to the international division. The companies from all over the world came and listened to it, and I've got a lot of interest, frankly. And I've got more interest from people outside this country than I can tell you. I've had interviews on Russian TV, besides all the Fox interviews and so forth. And it's an interesting, it's an idea that it's grasped people.
It's actually more of a comment. I'm kind of excited because this sounds similar to Pablo Island, what they've done there. And I'm more excited about this because, I mean, Pablo Island was just a resort community, but you're also looking at the, as far as like the government aspect and kind of separating yourself from the services that Detroit provides, like Pablo, they still rely on Amherstburg and all of the rules and regulations there. But I was just wondering, have you talked with them to
With Canadians?
help? No, no, it's
Pablo's
was a
Canadian,
Mar-
it's a Canadian island, Pablo Island.
Well, it's Canadian, but I thought Amazon, or is Amazon out of the picture now? But I didn't know if you were. You know, it's all, they've already created it, you're taking that kind of idea and moving it forward. I just wondered if you even spoke with them at all.
Well, I was on Pablo Island over Labor Day at a great restaurant there. I had great chicken. That's my only involvement with Pablo Island. Pablo Island is a Canadian island, and it now there's a lot of homes that built on it. You know, it used to be the amusement park, but the right now, well, there's another island. It's called maybe Fire Islands, a little bit north of there, and it's owned by a chemical company, American chemical company. It was actually Canadian, and somebody here was this state was very knowledgeable. Said, what you need to do is get the Canadians in the picture and create competition between the two countries for the idea. But I'm more optimistic.
And I'm not even suggesting getting the Canadians involved. It's just like, you know, the best idea is if they've already created, because they now have the influx of people coming over the ferries and everything, where it used to be a kind of a closed off community. And that sounds like the model that you're building, but on steroids.
Yeah, on steroids. And one big difference is Belle Isle has a bridge now for easy access, and the monorail, of course, can go too. So you can see the monorail in the picture that runs right along with the bridge, around the McCarthy Bridge.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
Let's call it.
Okay.